Transparency and accountability are key when it comes to fighting corruption.
If we do not curb corruption, it's going to have a debilitating effect on all of us.
Corruption has destroyed the market economy, the meritocracy, but also the basic rules of functioning of the Albanian economy.
The whistleblowing directive. It's EU law, and Austria has just implemented it to our national law. So I'm very happy we do that because it's a major stop to fight corruption in our country. One of the main challenges that we're facing worldwide when it comes to health, which is universal health coverage.
I've seen the growth and the impact on the lives of people on our universal healthcare policies. Our budget to support this has grown.
We will strive to digitalize the healthcare system, improve leadership and responsibility in the healthcare sector, reform the financing to incentivize our patients' needs, and clearly define the indicators of quality for care and services.
International financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF can play a critical role, bringing together member states, and we as parliamentarians have a role ourselves in keeping governments accountable to make sure that these reforms, that these transformations based on science, based on technical expertise that multilateral organizations can provide us, transform our health systems through our policy initiatives towards becoming more efficient, more capable of leading to quality of life and well-being for all citizens within our communities, within our societies.
The world is going through a lot of crises, especially for developing countries with regards to our debt and also our tax to GDP ratios.
In the recent years, the world has experienced several crises that have exposed the vulnerabilities of the global financial system and the need for effective debt and tax management.
2022, Parliament was adopted 9 amendments to the tax code. 2023, our income more tax received is 14.2% higher than last year.
The skyrocketing and in some areas unprecedented levels of poverty, inequality underpinned by the all-time high cost of living, thereby opening the gap wider between the haves and the have-nots.
MENA region holds a population over 400 million people, with a big percentage of youth under the age of 25. They are definitely facing unemployment challenges and lack of trainings.
South Sudan is undergoing challenges on higher rate of unemployment because of lack of investment opportunities.
Good morning, everyone. We are about to start. And for those of you who are in the left and the right rooms, if you could come to the room, that would be great. Merci.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you to take your seats. A very good morning to you and congratulations on getting in through the queues. Let me apologise in advance for that. We hope it will get a little bit slicker over the forums for the future. I think it's fair to say that the return of the first in-person Global Parliamentary Forum for 4 years has left us discovering a few things that are a little bit rusty. But thank you so much for bearing with us. And crucially, thank you so much for joining us here in Washington, D.C. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to this year's IMF World Bank Spring Meetings Global Parliamentary Forum. I want to start by extending my thanks to Sheila and Julie from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for welcoming us back here to World Bank headquarters. These in-person meetings were a long tradition and they're an important part of what it is we do. And there can be no more important time for us to be here together as representatives of millions of people from around the world. For decades, for the debate that is coming up, the decisions that are made this week will have a material bearing on whether we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in just 7 years' time and the deadlines of the Paris Climate Agreement in just 10,000 days' time. Together, you are the voices of hundreds of millions of people from around the world. You are on the front line. So you, I know, are in no doubt about the 7 giants that now block the road to progress. Want, disease, hunger, lost learning, debt, conflict, climate change. These are all huge obstacles in the road, standing, blocking our path to achieving both those Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris climate agreements. Defeating these giants is not getting any easier, as we will hear about this week. The tactics and the choices are going to get tougher and tougher. Not least because when we look at, for example, the amount of climate finance that is in place, it is at best a third to a half of what is going to be needed to make that shift to net zero carbon in the years ahead. Second, there is no deal yet on debt, despite the fact that low and middle income countries are now grappling with the highest gross debt for something like 50 years and are paying more on debt servicing than they have for the last 30 years. So we now have this challenge that we have to wrestle with. We have a climate finance that threatens our planet and a debt crisis that threatens the opportunities of our planet's children. So our mission in the Parliamentary Network is to create value for you, to help you as leaders tackle the challenges that you see in your countries. And we do that in three ways. So one is about providing the kind of thought leadership online, in books, in meetings like this, where you get the chance to listen and meet some of the leaders of the World Bank and the IMF, as well as other partners who are helping provide solutions for the years ahead. Second, we help create country chapters, platforms in each individual parliament where you as a parliament can build your own relationships with the World Bank and the IMF locally. It's been a huge priority and a huge pleasure for me to help set up the chapters in Tanzania, in Ghana, in Nigeria, Ukraine, and lay the foundations in Kenya and Ethiopia just last week. The third thing that we are trialing at the moment is a new partnership with McGill University in Canada. And this is providing a 9-month training program for a small group of parliamentarians to who we are very grateful for helping us test and get this program right. But helping you build up your expertise as parliamentarians, as well as building good networks with other parliamentarians, we think is going to be something that is going to be really important for the years ahead. So if this is the success that I hope and think it will be, then this will be something that we want to try and roll out a lot more widely. So I hope you have a rich and productive set of discussions this week. These discussions are only as ever as valuable and as productive as the work that you put in. So in anticipation of that, a huge thank you for me. But we're now going to hear from two of the people who have helped and provided tremendous support for the Parliamentary Network since it was created many, many moons ago, and who have helped us get our programme for this week right. So without further ado, let me hand the floor to Sheila Rizepi from the World Bank. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Liam. It's always wonderful to see you. And welcome to all of our honorable members of Parliament. It's a pleasure, really, to have you back in Washington, to welcome you to what is indeed a first in-person Global Parliamentary Forum in 4 years. It's gone very quickly, but we certainly have managed to sustain that level of engagement over the years in various formats. It's also wonderful to hear that we are joined by well over 100 parliamentarians from so many countries around the world. And we appreciate that you've traveled from far and wide to be in Washington this week. I want to extend my thanks to you, Liam, once again for all the tremendous work that you put into the Parliamentary Network for co-organizing this convening, this conference, and of course to Julie and our colleagues at the IMF for their continued leadership and support of the Parliamentary Network. It is indeed a collective effort, one that we have all grown to appreciate and leverage together. We are looking forward to very productive discussions during the spring meetings. But we also acknowledge that much has changed over the past 4 years. We meet at a time of a continuing global crisis confronting the world. Growth prospects for developing countries continue to be weak. This high debt, high inflation, climate crisis is not easing up. No shortage. Your 7 challenges indeed summarize very well, Liam, what we are all collectively faced with. What is a particularly deep concern for us at the World Bank is that global extreme poverty rate has risen from 8.4 to 9.3%, the first recorded increase since we started keeping count. So it has had an impact. And to help tackle these crises, the World Bank Group has worked side by side with your countries to help respond quickly with financing and other support. We scaled up our crisis response to address food and fragility, pandemics, droughts, many of the issues that you will discuss over the coming days, and have also stepped up support to 74 of the world's poorest countries, the IDA countries, through our last replenishment cycle. And I want to extend my thanks, the group's thanks for all of your support of IDA. These spring meetings revolve around the theme of reshaping development for a new era. And it's a particularly fitting theme, as this week we will discuss ways to evolve the bank's work with a particular focus on global public goods, the interconnected issues that affect us all. And we know that the investment needs related to global public goods are vast. As needs grow and expand, so must, of course, the attention we pay to them and the financing we make available. As you're aware, we've been working with our board of executive directors, your representatives, to enhance the bank's capacity to end extreme poverty, to boost shared prosperity, and of course to address these global challenges in a more inclusive and sustainable manner. We're on track. We expect to make a lot of progress this week, meaningful progress in discussions with our governors. And of course, I invite you all to access the Development Committee Evolution paper, the paper that summarizes the bank's thinking on our consultation website. That's accessible to everyone. Liam, I want to thank you, of course, for engaging with our senior leadership on the evolution roadmap, for sharing your thoughts on both the process and the substance. It's been immensely valuable. Everyone here in this room plays a big role in advancing development in your own countries, and we want you to know that you can depend on our support and our partnership. Now, we'll touch on several big issues this week in our public events. We'll talk about climate, human capital, learning losses, debt, sustainable finance, and private sector. Your conference, of course, will touch on all of these issues. Civil society partners will discuss them. Governors and ministers, representatives of your countries also will do too. I hope you will find these engagements useful in advancing our collective goals. But this week aside, I also want to take a brief moment to share just a few examples of our ongoing engagement. This conference is such a valuable convening, but we continue to engage throughout the year, and Liam's, of course, alluded to a lot of that work. First, technical advice and briefings on issues. This network is an invaluable asset. We're very pleased that, for example, our country and climate development reports were presented to the Infrastructure and Energy Committee in Morocco last year, that the work of the national chapters of the Parliamentary Network has been such a great platform for engagement and inclusion of parliamentarians in briefings and consultations. Leah mentioned several very active and newly formed parliamentary chapters that really provide that focal point on matters related to the bank and the IMF that we've all grown to value. And finally, the increased engagement through parliamentary field visits. These provide a wonderful opportunity to see development results on the ground, to exchange views and experiences with partners in those countries. I know there are plans underway for the next visit. So I hope you will continue to find these exchanges in Fora helpful. Welcome you once again warmly to Washington, D.C. I'll pause here and hand over to my colleague, Julie, and want to thank you and welcome you to the meetings. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Julie Kozak. I am the very new Director of Communications at the IMF, so it is an extra pleasure for me to be welcoming you all to Washington this morning in my new role. Let me also thank Liam and Sheila for their kind introduction and for helping organize this wonderful event today. I am truly delighted to be here with you. This is a timely discussion. The world is facing a lot of challenges. Liam and Sheila have outlined many of them. And we're looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you as we try to collectively address those challenges. Let me just take a few minutes to step back, and I'll say a few words about how we see the global situation, a few priority areas that we at the IMF are looking into. I can highlight a few events at the spring meetings which will look to address those challenges, and then also I want to talk a little bit about how we can continue to work together. So why do we think the world is facing so many challenges? Well, if we just look at the current outlook for global growth, as our managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, mentioned last week, global growth remains weak by historical comparison, both in the near and medium terms. With rising geopolitical tensions and still high inflation, a robust recovery from the shocks that we have faced, starting with the pandemic, the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, inflation, the cost of living crisis, a robust recovery does remain elusive. And this harms the prospects of everyone, but especially our most vulnerable people and countries. So against this backdrop, what do we as the IMF see as our priorities? I won't get into too much detail here, but let me touch on three areas. The first, as already mentioned by Liam and Sheila, is debt. Poorer countries with heavy debt burdens need more of our collective help. We are, jointly with the World Bank and the Indian presidency of the G20, having a meeting of a global sovereign debt roundtable during these spring meetings to try to accelerate progress on debt resolution for countries under the common framework and more broadly. Another key area that we're focused on is, of course, the climate crisis. And this is, you know better than we do, the impact that climate is having across the world, from droughts to floods. Climate change is impacting the lives and livelihoods of people in all of our countries, and it's a topic that we need to try to come together to tackle. And the third area that I want to touch on is helping the most vulnerable. Our most vulnerable people and countries face the greatest risks, and the fund is evolving to support them. Drawing on the strength of our collective, the IMF has provided close to $300 billion in new financing for 95 countries since the start of the COVID pandemic, and 57 of those 95 countries are low-income countries. And we also, of course, had our historic $650 billion SDR allocation, which is helping boost global liquidity. Yet for the most vulnerable members of our global family, additional support is going to be essential, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Let me now just turn and briefly highlight some of the events that we're having in putting together our program. You'll see a number of high-level events this week around climate change, around debt, and around inflation. Just to name a few, today, our managing director and the president of the World Bank will be talking at the Bretton Woods Committee event on scaling up climate financing. On Thursday, we will have our global debate, which will feature our managing director, Finance Minister Nadia Fetta from Morocco, Mo Ibrahim, Bundesbank President Nagel, and Raghu Rajan to debate global issues, the global outlook, how we can come together collectively as a global community. And then specifically on the issue of inflation, which is touching all of us, we will have a seminar moderated by our first Deputy Managing Director, Geeta Gopinath, and that will tackle the issue of inflation and monetary policy. I just touch on those few topics. There are many, many more to come, and of course we invite you to join us as we discuss these very important global issues. Finally, let me just touch on areas where we look forward to collaborating with you. First, we look forward to a rich exchange of views with you. It's important for us to hear from you what is top of mind for parliamentarians and for your constituents, especially as they pertain to our institutions. And in the areas where we can use your help, I don't want to, of course, preempt our managing director, but I see a few areas already. And these really are related to the issues where I focused, especially on how can we best support the most vulnerable members of our global community. And this involves support in rechanneling unused SDRs so that they can be used more productively, support for work on climate and combating the climate crisis, and very importantly, we at the IMF, our managing director has made a call to wealthier countries to meet the shortfalls and gaps in our concessional lending facility, the PRGT, which is the facility we use to help our low-income members. This is an area where we do have small funding gaps at the moment, and we are very much looking to our stronger members to help fill those gaps. Let me stop here. I very much look forward to the discussion with you all today, and importantly, as I said, to hearing your views on how we can serve you and your constituents who are our members better. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both very much indeed. We've got a little time for a quick conversation here now before we fill these guys up with more coffee and caffeinate them properly before David and Kristalina join us at the top of the hour. But Sheila, maybe I could start with you, because a lot of the challenges that parliamentarians are facing now is how to juggle two or three big things. So, as David Malpass has said, there was already quite high debt going into COVID. People have now taken on more debt. Those debt burdens are now high. Interest rates are now high. Debt servicing is getting more expensive. And yet, despite all of that, parliamentarians are having to argue for budgets that might help with malnutrition. We've got 200 million children facing malnutrition around the world. We've got acute problems with healthcare, particularly in rural areas. And yet many budgets will also be burdened by these kind of big infrastructure projects like high-speed railways or new roads and all of that good stuff. Is the bank able at a country level to begin helping parliamentarians just think through how to juggle some of these demands?
That's a great question, Liam. Thank you very much. And you're right, we haven't yet started to caffeinate properly, but in a couple of minutes or so, I will myself move on to my second or third. And I appreciate the question because it illustrates the complexity of development. It is incredibly hard to be making choices that come at the expense of another equally important choice. So from our perspective, those are interlinked. They are all urgent. And they're certainly all increasing. If you look at the way IDA, our fund for the poorest countries, is set up, it's set up in a way that tackles all of these issues at the same time. You will see significant policy commitments on issues like nutrition, but also on debt, on education, on learning, on infrastructure, in ways that are suitable for the countries where we work and that also respond to client country demands. So I think that's the first thing we have to look at. But how do we begin to maybe discuss, resolve these important issues of prioritization at country level, I think is a critical question. And I mentioned earlier the briefing that we have held in Morocco on our country climate and development reports that illustrate the pathways that countries can take towards climate resilient growth that also address development priorities in countries. I think those are incredibly powerful platforms for going over critical issues. They give us ample opportunity to debate what is urgent and critical now. And as far as the World Bank is concerned, as you know, we're present on the ground, we're in the field, we're in every country in the world and working with all of you. We also pull together country partnership frameworks that define those priorities for the years to come. And then we respond in terms of our financing to what a country has really set as a set of urgent priorities. But like you, I find it, we all sit here and wonder, is there could you possibly argue that something takes urgency over another matter? I think at global level, we've all said we're concerned about unsustainable debt levels, about climate change, about incredible losses in learning that we've experienced during the COVID pandemic. But it's at country level that all of these issues really hit the ground, and for us, working directly with governments and with elected officials is the only way we can get those right.
Now, you mentioned the climate change disclosure reports. Not everyone here will be 100% familiar with them. For those who have not yet seen them, the climate change disclosure reports are one of the most important breakthroughs in tackling climate change of the last decade. They provide an expert analysis of how countries need to mobilize investment to hit their defined contributions as part of the Paris talks and the COP talks. Do you want to just say a little bit more about how many, because not all of them have been done yet, have they?
No, not all of them.
There's still more to go, but they're already making a difference, I think.
You're absolutely right. We, last year, in the lead up to COP27 in Egypt, we'd set ourselves a target of getting these deep analytical pieces done in as many countries as we possibly can. And we set a goal of about 25 to 30, and we've already done 25 CCDRs as they've come to be known. But if you don't ever have to use the acronym, please don't. It's much better. But they essentially look at a country's climate and development trajectory, arguing that climate and development are two sides of the same coin, and then point to unique pathways towards low carbon growth that point to pathways that improve livelihoods, so they tackle both the climate mitigation and the climate adaptation challenge. If we've done one for Bangladesh, it will look different than the one that we have done for the Sahel countries, because the challenges faced by those countries are uniquely different. So they're quite specific. And if we can do anything through the network, certainly point you to the 25 plus that we have already done, because they will contain information to the countries that you represent here today. They're invaluable. I myself have gone through every one of them. And there are some there are some similarities in how we approach the challenges, but we also realize that if you're talking about a low-income country in Africa and you're talking about a middle-income country in Asia, you're probably going to have to adapt some different pathways to dealing with the climate challenge. So very valuable and very granular at country level.
And some of the conclusions from this, I should say also include the investment number. So just helping understand how much money needs to be mobilized either at a country level or indeed at a regional level. That's something that these reports help understand. They point to a big debate, though, that I know that you're having this week here at the World Bank, which is for a long time now you've had these twin goals. So ending extreme poverty, building more inclusive growth. And obviously there's a big debate now about how we expand that mission to include sustainability and resilience. And I guess because we all live in the real world, we recognize that if you're going to build a bank with a bigger mission, you probably need to build a bigger bank as well. How do you think that debate may unfold this week and I guess over the course of the year to come? Because we have an important climate finance summit in June in Paris. We then have annual meetings, which will be in Morocco, and then we have COP in Abu Dhabi. So we'll be talking about this quite a lot this week, I suppose, won't we? This year.
Very, very much so. A lot on the table, and you might have come across it as something called the evolution conversation, or if you have seen things like, or if you've heard expressions like the evolution roadmap, it really alludes to that, certainly in internal bank speak. But you're absolutely right. I alluded to that earlier. The investment needs for countries have grown, their challenges have grown, and therefore must our responses. They ought to respond to challenges faced by individual countries, to the vast needs that are out there in terms of investments for tackling climate change or pandemics or increasing fragility. So therefore our responses also have to upgrade and evolve with that. So we've been having conversations with our shareholders, with our executive directors and the board, and this week with our governors, and have proposed some steps that you can read more about in the Development Committee paper, which the governors will be discussing this coming Wednesday. But they're really looking at three areas: the sort of updating the vision and mission of the bank. You've talked about the bank's mission has been eradicate extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity. But now we're looking at making sure that it's quite clear and quite explicit, although it has been implicit, that it should be inclusive and resilient and sustainable. So really expanding the bank's mission to very explicitly focus on the issues that we have discussed. The bank's operating model, how it responds, how it works with client countries, and then of course the financing model. And some of that requires actions to be taken by the bank, looking at some innovative ways to leverage our own resources, as we have done, for example, with our IDA replenishments. But some of it also comes with discussions about what more can we collectively as the international community do to help support the World Bank, our clients, and of course the whole international financial system. So a lot on the table. I expect a lot will be decided this week. I also, like you, know that there are some important touch points over the course of the year where we'll continue to have this conversation, look at additional ways to really crystallize that link between the mission and the resources required to address them. But yeah, a lot this year.
Great. I can say this a bit more bluntly than Sheila, but one of the debates that we're obviously going to have as an international community is there may be more that we can get out of the bank's current balance sheet. That's true. That's worth exploring. But the truth is that given the challenges that we now face, we're probably reaching the point where we're going to have to bite the bullet and decide as a global community that we need to build a bigger bank. And that's going to involve richer countries in particular putting more in than they are today. So, Julie, let me turn to you. So, you're very welcome. You step into some big shoes that Jerry Rice has left, but this has been an extraordinary year for the IMF as well. But before we get into some of the extraordinary innovation that you've been leading, like food shock windows, the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust, just say a quick word about bank stability, because this is something that Kristalina has talked a little bit about over the last couple of weeks in the light of some revelations about smaller banks around the world being perhaps under some pressure.
Yep. No, thanks so much, Liam, and very happy to be here. So I think on the banking system, what we have seen is moving from a prolonged period of very low interest rates globally and in the advanced economies very quickly to much higher interest rates has exposed underlying vulnerabilities in the banking system. Right, and we saw that, both here in the United States and also in Europe. What we also saw was a very, very rapid and comprehensive reaction from policymakers to address the problems very quickly and rapidly, with the view to both resolving problems in individual institutions, but also with the view to preventing contagion. So I think our general view is that as long as financial pressures remain limited, then central banks, in a sense, can use different tools to tackle different problems, because we still have the problem of high inflation. So as long as financial pressures are limited, central banks should continue to focus monetary policy on the fight against inflation, and then they have other tools such as the ones we saw them deploy, liquidity provision, supervisory actions to address any vulnerabilities in the banking system.
Perfect, thank you. Just wanted to close that off because it's going to be something that I think comes up a fair bit this week. So one of the extraordinary things that the IMF has been able to do over the last year or two is, I think, quadruple the amount of zero interest concessional finance. It's up to what I think about 24 billion.
24 billion, yep.
Now, and that is obviously super important a fact for countries that are now thinking, right, how do we restructure this debt burden that we have today? Lots of it is in the hands of countries that disagree with each other. Lots of it is in the hands of the private sector, not just the public sector. Multilaterals have got some of the debt, but a lot of the debt is held by others. It feels to a lot of us like we've got big countries who are pointing fingers at each other when they need to start just talking numbers. Do you think it is possible economically for countries to begin restructuring debt to lower the overall cost of finance, given the availability of concessional finance from both the fund and the bank?
So I think, so let me just step back a little bit to say, yes, the creditor landscape for emerging and developing countries has shifted. So there are new creditors. We think of the traditional creditors as being what we call the Paris Club creditors, the United States, the European countries. And now we have new creditors, China, India, Saudi Arabia, also providing finance to low-income countries. So the creditor landscape has shifted. And because of this change in the creditor landscape, the traditional coordination mechanisms, right, are just not as effective. So I think the challenge for us, for the multilateral institutions, is, isn't our job to bring our member countries together to try to solve problems. That's fundamentally what we were set up for, to be a forum where countries with diverse views, with in diverse stages of development, come together to try to solve global problems. And that's why so I think the short answer is yes, we believe that we must find a solution to the debt problem that is confronting many of our particularly low-income members, but not only. We have countries also like Sri Lanka, which are suffering with debt issues. So we must find a solution to this problem. And part of that answer, we believe, is through multilateral fora, right? Which is why we have, jointly with the World Bank and India's presidency of the G20, launched what we call the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. This roundtable brings together creditors, both traditional, say from the Paris Club, and also new creditors like China, India, Saudi Arabia. It also brings together borrower countries and the private creditors. And the idea is to put everyone together at the table to discuss, importantly, how do we accelerate the debt restructuring process? What are the processes, information sharing, what is needed to accelerate this process so we can get it unstuck? And so I think it's not just that should we do it, we must. It's a critical deliverable for our members.
Yeah. That's good to hear the kinetic energy that you're putting into it, I think. Just very quickly, this week I think is also a good opportunity to showcase some innovations like Resilience and Sustainability Trust. You've had a number of member countries now sign on to that. Is that something that is going to be expanded over the course of the next few months as well? Are more members now joining on to that?
Yes, so the what we call RST, Resilience and Sustainability Trust, is a new instrument that is developed to help member countries build resilience. And most of the member countries, or maybe even all, that have already gone for the RST, see this resilience as related to climate adaptation or addressing the changes of addressing the challenges of climate change. We've had 5 member countries already receive the RST, and we have about 40 members requesting RST.
40.
Okay. Yes, so we have many. The demand for this instrument is high. We have resources. In terms of financial resources, this has been through the rechanneling of the SDR allocation that I referred to in my opening remarks. And so what we are doing is taking it, I don't want to say slowly, but step by step, because we also, it's new, and we are learning as we're going along. So each member that comes to request an RST, we learn a little bit, and then we go to the next. But we expect that this will be, so certainly we are full steam ahead, addressing the requests as they come in, and we do expect that we will see many more RSTs in the coming months and year.
Excellent. So this is definitely something to use the opportunity of this week to find a little bit more about, because it is something that is potentially a game changer when it comes to both climate finance and some of the development adjustments that are going to be needed around adaptation to climate change. So that almost brings us up to our time. Clock is against us. Just let me ask a very quick final question. Just what else do you think you would like to hear back from parliamentarians this week, and anything else you think our members ought to be just keeping an eye on as the day, as the week unfolds? Sheila.
Thank you. I'm really encouraged by both the growth and sort of solidarity of this network that we have benefited from immensely over the years. And one of the things that we value the most is that open and honest and transparent channel for communications from our countries back to us here in DC. Now, of course, we engage directly at country level as well, but this particular forum has always given us a unique insight into the very different needs, but at the same time of countries, but also at the same time some collective challenges. So the more vocal you are, the more we can hear from you, the more that you can engage with our bank, with our management and with our experts, the more informed these discussions here in Washington will be, with your unique perspectives, of course, from the countries. And where there are questions about some of the work that we do, whether that's on climate change or issues related to debt, or indeed engagements at country level, please use this platform as a vehicle to gain that additional insight, and also certainly to see those development projects in action. So really an open invitation to hear more and to engage with our experts even more than you already do.
Perfect. Julie, any things that you want to hear, and any things you think people should be learning from this week in particular?
So I think for us at the IMF, what we really look forward to hearing is, how can we help? What is it that that your countries or regions need, and to also engage, I think, as Sheila said, in explaining, hopefully, to you, or demonstrating, showcasing the things that we're doing, especially the things where we're new things that we're doing, right? And I think that's especially true for us at the IMF, as we just talked about the RST. We also have a new food shock window that we opened in October for countries facing acute food insecurity. So let us have a good exchange of views, and please do let us know how can we best help you? How you are our members, and so how can we best serve our membership?
Perfect. Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of our first session. This is very much the warm-up for our town hall that starts in 15 minutes with David and Kristalina. So there is just time now. If you would like for a very quick cup of tea or coffee, please be back in here just a few minutes before 11. But please also join me in saying a huge thank you to Sheila Redzepi and Julie Cusack. Thank you.
We're on fluid time, Robert. What I do need to check is just
خلاص.
Everybody waits.
Good morning, everybody. Hello. Great to see you. Right.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I can see you around the room gathering together statistics and stories and selfies, which is great. So let me bring you very quickly now to order, because we haven't got tons of time. But it is a huge personal pleasure for me to introduce this next session. For the last 3 years now, we have run our Global Parliamentary Forum online, thanks to our brilliant digital team at the Parliamentary Network. And so this is the first time in 4 years that I get to introduce David and Kristalina in person. And I'd like you to join me in welcoming them to the stage. So, as we know, because we're politicians, when roads are steep and when seas are rough, it is absolutely vital that we have strong leaders to lead us, strong leaders at the helm, strong navigators, and that is exactly what we are blessed to have in David and Kristalina. David and Kristalina, this morning we kicked off with a quick tour of many of the problems that we as politicians face on the ground, what I call the 7 giants, blocking the road to progress, blocking the road towards the Sustainable Development Goals and the agreements set out in the Paris Climate Deal. Want, hunger, disease, lost learning, debt, conflict, and climate change. These are all issues that you have brought new clarity to. They are issues that you've put on the agendas of world leaders, and these are issues that I know will dominate our discussions this week. We, however, here in this room are not daunted. We are determined. We are determined because we are driven by the dreams of the people that we came into public life to serve. When I think about these challenges, I think about the children I met in the Masai Mara, who, when I talked to them, they had the same dreams as my kids. They wanted to be doctors, they wanted to be police officers, they wanted to be teachers, and some of them, so help them, wanted to be politicians. But what they all gave me was the difficult stories of what it is like going to school when you are hungry, what it is like going to school when you are thirsty. And the challenge for us is that if we leave an opportunity gap for those children, we create an opportunity cost for our world. And that is why we come together in parliamentary networks like this to mobilize both the ambition and the compassion that we know we are capable of, because through mobilizing ambition and compassion, we can change the world for the better. That is why we are so grateful to the leadership that you have provided over the last 4 years. This will be David's last parliamentary forum, and so it gives me the pleasure and the privilege to thank him for an extraordinary period of service at the World Bank. When I look at the statistics, David, the thing that stands out for me is the way that under your leadership, funding for global public goods has literally doubled to $100 billion, half of which is in climate finance. So on behalf of all of us in the Parliamentary Network, I want to say to you, David, an enormous thank you for your service. Meanwhile, at the IMF, this has been a period of radical change and creativity too. $300 billion in new lending, $650 billion issued in new special drawing rights. Great policy innovations like the food shock window and the resilience and sustainability trust. Something like 4-fold increase in the amount of 0% concessional finance made available to countries in need. So look, we are very lucky to have 2 creative leaders at the helm of the IMF and the World Bank. This week, however, is not all about slaps on the back. This is about asking ourselves searching questions about what more we need to do for the future. We are very lucky that the rocks on which we build are strong, but build we must, and it is together that that building will go further and faster. So without further ado, let me hand the floor to Kristalina for a few thoughts on the year ahead. Kristalina.
So I can see everybody better. Thank you very much, Liam and David. Thank you for hosting us. It is sweet and at the same time sour and sad, because we would be here with you, this group, this time for a farewell. Now, this group is incredibly valuable for us. Why? For a very obvious reason. You represent the people we serve, and we take your views humbly as a source of wisdom for us as we make decisions together with the authorities of our member states. I want to talk about where we are as we gather, where is the world economy, and what are the issues that would be preoccupying us during these meetings. Where we are. Despite remarkably resilient labor markets and consumer demand in the EU and in the United States, despite the uplift of China's reopening, this year we expect global growth to be below 3%, and tomorrow we would share the details of our projections. What is even more concerning is inflation has proven to be stickier, especially core inflation, meaning that central banks have to continue to strive towards price stability by keeping interest rates higher. And once we moved in this period of higher interest rates and scarcer liquidity, after many years of low interest rates, even below zero interest rates, that has exposed vulnerabilities in the financial sector. It was to be expected. What we didn't expect was exactly where it would happen. And it is clear that these twin goals of price stability and financial stability would demand a lot from central bankers and other policymakers. What it also means is that the prospects to unleash the growth potential of the world economy remained cloudier. And as you would see tomorrow, we are projecting the next 5 years growth rates to remain around 3%. This is way below the 3.8% we had in the last 2 decades. And it is way below what the world needs to achieve the aspirations of hundreds of millions of people who rely on more dynamic economic growth for jobs and opportunities. So, in that environment, what would our meetings concentrate on? Of course, there would be a great deal of attention to steering the world economy through choppy waters, and choppy they still are. In other words, the immediate priorities of this dual task of achieving price stability and protecting financial stability, because this is the foundation for growth. But I hope that beyond that, we would look into more systemic issues, and we will bring the energy of our membership to mobilize to address those issues. So, what is on our list at the IMF? Number one on the list is the dangerous divergence that has originated already during COVID times. Countries in strong position are able to help their businesses and their people more. Weaker countries cannot. And as a result, what we see is low-income countries per capita income growth falling below this of middle-income countries, meaning the terrible, terrible trends that came with COVID of more poverty and more hunger may persevere. Attention to low-income countries is at the heart of what David and his team do. But I want to assure you that we take this very much to heart at the IMF as well. We are concentrating on mobilizing more concessional finance for our poverty reduction and growth trust. This is our small brother of David's IDA, but it is a very important instrument because it allows the IMF to step up together with the World Bank and others and provide the macro policy foundation for low-income countries to accelerate their development. We have a shortfall. Why? Because of two reasons. Demand for these resources has gone up. It quadrupled. And the cost of bringing interest rate to zero has gone up because interest rates have gone up. We also are determined to work on a second issue that goes beyond low-income countries, and this is the issue of debt. The bank and the IMF have been loud and clear that helping countries suffering under a high pressure of debt remains a key priority for them and for the rest of the world. Because if a debt crisis unfolds, it would bring not only pain and suffering to these countries, but it would undermine economic and national security for the rest of the world. We have our new platform to address issues of debt, the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, and I promise you, you would see us relentlessly pursuing on a path of making the issues of debt manageable before it is too late. Last but not least, building the foundation for robust growth for the future, one that is green, based on technological innovation, on embracing the digital revolution, and one in which we see better utilization of the large capital that exists in the world. Today, we are not short of financial resources. We are short of their presence where they would make the biggest difference in emerging markets and developing economies. Rather than going up, financial flows to these countries over the last month has been going down. And rather than going into SMEs, empowering women, they are still concentrated primarily in large-scale portfolio. How can we generate a better transmission line for financing to go to emerging markets and developing economies where this financing still comes short? Now, I want to finish, so that is going to be a very important topic of conversation as well. I want to finish by reflecting for those of you in this audience that have celebrated Easter these last days. For those, there may be some like me who will be celebrating Easter this week. For those of you who have been celebrating Ramadan, for all religions, for all walks of life, one message that I cannot imagine would not unite us, and it is to see a senseless war that has been devastating the Ukrainian people come to an end. It is not only terrible for the victims of the war, it is terrible for our aspirations as humanity. It has practically killed the peace dividend we have enjoyed for 3 decades. And it is adding to geopolitical tensions. They make our job of keeping the world together harder, and it should not be that way. For a world where every child can reach its potential, our ability to unite, overcome divisions, and do our best for prosperity, it is so paramount. So may there be that wisdom that we all share in these precious moments of Easter, of Ramadan, of any of the celebrations of values we all hold dear. Thank you.
Let me hand the floor straight over to you, David, and start thinking of some questions. So we normally get about 2 to 3 rounds of questions in, so start having a think now, and I'll bring as many of you in as possible. Without further ado, David Malpass.
Thanks so much, Liam, and thank you, Kristalina, and thanks everybody. 4 years ago, yesterday, I came to the World Bank and with a lot of experience with many of your countries, and there's been many more, and I want to single out some as we go along, but it's very good to be here, and I'm sorry it's been, I've tried to be very transparent and open in my administration of the presidency, and it was unfortunate that we couldn't meet due to COVID in past years, so I'm super tickled that we could do it this year. So honorable members of Parliament and ladies and gentlemen, thanks. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Parliamentary Network and the IMF for co-organizing this event, and very pleased that the IMF, that the World Bank could host it this year. To set the stage, I remain very concerned about the prospects for developing countries. As we think about the world into the future, having growth that is successful around the world is important, because we all live on the same planet, move around on the same planet, experience illnesses together, eat food that is common across the globe, and so it's vital that we have people in poorer countries moving up. That is a goal of convergence, of them, the growth being faster in poorer countries than in advanced economies, and we aren't achieving that now. And so it's a grave concern. As we look at the reversals in development that occurred due to COVID and due to the current situation, we have severe backsliding on poverty, and we have backsliding on in climate costs, the costs going up, the greenhouse gas emissions going up and up and up, without a prospect of that trend improving through the current developments. We also have on education, it looks as if children around the world went backwards due to school closures. It's a severe crisis of literacy and of numeracy. World Bank is very much in the middle of that, but the challenge is 1 billion lost years of schooling. That's 1 billion children moving backward by 1 year, and it may be worse than that. So these are huge challenges facing developing countries, and on top of that, we have high food prices, fertilizer prices, natural gas prices that are used to make the fertilizer, and concerns about the crop cycle over the next 1 to 2 years. I've been traveling in the last few months to China, to India, to Dominican Republic, to Niger, to Togo, French West Africa, and the fragility, the impact on people is devastating and looks as if it will weigh on the future. The World Bank, we are proposing or have identified ways to address it through achieving macroeconomic stability. That means redoubling efforts on fiscal and monetary, tax policy, trade policy, all of those. We want to prioritize sound policies to promote private investment. Nurturing free and fair international trade is vital. A lot of the productivity growth of the world comes from people swapping goods and ideas and services around the world, and that also is in a backsliding. There's an increasing resort by the world to trade barriers and to protectionism, to self-sufficiency methods that will be a setback for productivity. And then also we need to look to strengthen the international community's mechanisms to better finance global public goods. Kristalina mentioned, and it's very important, the transmission mechanism from the advanced economies to the developing world, and especially the poorest countries, needs to be strengthened and changed, and I think re-examined. We have a world financial system that's built on giant fiscal deficits in the advanced economies. Even though their populations are going down, they don't need so much new investment, and yet the spending there is gigantic. And also the central banks of the advanced economies are buying long-term debt, bonds, and that creates an instability in the world because of the duration risk. It takes capital straight away from the short-term financing needed by countries that are growing and improving. So these are big challenges. What we've done at the bank, and I want to go through a little bit some of our activities, and then we'll move along. But I want to take note. We addressed the COVID crisis, the pandemic itself, the war in Ukraine, where we've been supplying a big portion of the disbursements for the non-military assistance there, promoting debt transparency and sustainability. That was one of my major goals, both in the U.S. government and with the World Bank. We're accelerating the IDA, and so we achieved a record IDA 19 and then an even higher record IDA 20 in just 2 years. So that's allowed us to front load the IDA resources from the advanced economies to the developing economies in two cycles. We are pushing hard on private capital, ways to enable more private capital to go into developing countries, and also the impact. We've improved and greatly strengthened the impact and analytical focus of our major expansion of climate finance. Liam mentioned the expansion, but it's very important that it's based on strong analytics. We've done CCDRs with many of your countries, and also that it seek to have impact. So what the World Bank has done is, rather than thinking in terms of how much is spent, we have to think in terms of how much impact has there been on adaptation and on mitigation. And I'm pleased to see the world kind of shifting its dialogue away from just the numbers of pledged money. Those need to be completed, and the World Bank is more than completing our pledges, but that needs to also shift to what kinds of spending will actually have impact and improve people's lives. And I think there needs to be a lot more work in that area. So as we look at it, I was looking around the room and I saw people from many countries. I saw Niger here, where I was there 2 weeks ago. South Sudan is here, and we have worked hard on both Sudan and South Sudan. And the famine in East Africa is a giant concern of the bank. I see Suriname here, where the debt problems persist. Madagascar, one of my first, my first trip as president of the World Bank was to Madagascar, which faces both food, climate, and connectivity challenges. Burkina Faso is here. I landed there last week, and the fragility concerns of the Sahel are very apparent within the World Bank's work. So we have had a major effort over the last 4 years to put money into fragile environments and to put our physical people into fragile environments. So as almost everyone in the room knows, there's a World Bank office working to develop programs that will help the people of your countries. I see Ghana here, where we're working daily. Kristalina and I have talked about ways to make progress on Ghana this week in terms of its debt creditor committee meeting. And and I see Latvia here and Azerbaijan. So Latvia I visited in 1975, and think how the world has changed, and I'll maybe summarize on this. So in 1975, Latvia was a Soviet empire, communist country without really any prospects for growth. Look at the change that's been taken place. Kristalina knows this from deep in her heart, from Bulgaria's transformation from a communist state under the Soviet Union to the freedom that it enjoys today, and the great enhancement of per capita income, of awareness of climate changes. One of the first debt to climate swaps that was done was a steel mill in Bulgaria, and we aspire to have more deals like that, and the World Bank is working on that every day. So with that as an opening, I wanted to thank the Parliamentary Network and look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Liam.
David, thank you so much indeed. Can I just have a very quick indicative show of hands for questions, just so our microphone helpers can see? Okay, perfect. We may just try and do this as one very big round. So just for those with a microphone, I'm going to go to Tanzania and then Austria, and then I'm going to come back through the front. So let me just kick off. Let me open the bowling, if I may. So we've been setting up country chapters around the world since we've been allowed to travel again. One of the messages that comes back to me from parliamentarians a lot is how on earth do we juggle the conflicting priorities? So David has already talked a lot about countries going into COVID with quite high debt burdens, perhaps because of infrastructure, railway links, roads, ports, etc. Then lots more debt came on during COVID. And a lot of MPs are having to think, well, how do I pay back the debts, pay for the infrastructure, and switch spending into dealing with stunting or water in schools or child nutrition programs? Now, both of you have said in your own ways that the outlook over the next year is not going to get massively easier. Some glimmers of sunlight, but slower growth than we've had for a long time. What is the kind of advice that you would give to parliamentarians arguing in their parliaments about the ways forward? Kristalina, what are the sort of 2 or 3 pointers that you would offer by ways of advice?
The number one advice I would give is look at what we learned from the COVID crisis. Countries that stepped into the crisis with strong fundamentals dealt with it better than countries with weak fundamentals. Not very different from people with strong immune systems that could withstand the virus better than people with weak immune systems. Number one priority remains build strong fundamentals. In other words, there has to be a vibrant institutional framework that allows countries to make the best out of the resources they have. There is a need to collect taxes from those who can pay. Tax avoidance still remains a big problem everywhere, not just in developing countries. With the exception of maybe Ukraine, I want to give you an interesting anecdote in that regard. When I was in Ukraine in February, I met with a group of women, and we talked about priorities. And they reminded me that Ukraine used to be a country where paying taxes was not so popular. But last year, Ukraine collected 36% to GDP in taxes, because collecting taxes is paying taxes is a patriotic duty. So one woman tells me, if my husband doesn't pay taxes, I would leave him for a man who does. I'm closing this to say that we have to build.
That is a lesson we could all benefit from around the world.
Yes,
I think.
that we do need to take very seriously the strength of the economy that is being built domestically first and foremost. Secondly, we have a huge obligation as partners of these countries to do our best to amplify their voices at a time when there is a lot of noise internationally, that helping poorer countries grow is in their interest, but it is also in the interest of everyone. It brings stability and security. And that using multilateral institutions is the best way to channel financing, because we do it in a coordinated manner and we get a bigger bang for the buck. And third one is to continue to build solidarity among communities and people, the social fabric on which we all depend. And that is, in my view, something that is one of the less assessed yet victims of COVID. Not communicating with each other, being isolated from each other, it actually brought a cost. So we have to rebuild that social fabric. And us being here today is one wonderful way to do it.
Thank you so much. David.
Thanks, Liam. A couple additional thoughts. One is I want to come back to the stunting point that you raised and add to the concern. One of the things going on that we detect is as farmers use less fertilizer, their productivity, their yields go down, and that's clearly happening. And then as people are confronted with that, their protein goes down. And so we have two kind of silent problems going on. One is the farmlands in developing countries are being under-fertilized, which means next year's crop can't be as productive in the following years. And then people themselves are being undernourished in a way that is not detected right away, but will show up over the years. So the urgency of this task is gigantic. I'll stay on the challenging news. My sense is the advanced economies won't help that much. If we think about the challenges facing developing countries, there certainly is a self-interest by advanced economies, but when it comes to really putting money in, that is a rarity. And so I think in this very challenging environment for developing countries, we've laid out the forecast that it looks like it's going to be a long period of slow growth. And so countries need to look inside. Certainly you can look for more resources from outside, but a lot of the resources are going to need to come from inside. And I know how hard that is. A very poor country, where can the resources come from? So then I want to turn to a thought on direction. As we look at countries around the world, the excessive subsidies and the barriers to people's productivity are notable in almost every country, and particularly in the United States and the advanced economies. You have programs that are very expensive for the government that benefit a narrow group of people, and that's true in in developing countries as well. So really examine those programs with the knowledge that that subsidies are supposed to be targeted and time-bound, and exemptions from taxes are supposed to be targeted and time-bound and limited, and that's not really where the world is right now. COVID caused bigger and bigger subsidies, and for many of the countries, they haven't been reversed. And one final point, put burden on the World Bank, on the IMF, in countries. I ask people all the time, but I don't get enough response, to look at the programs and loans that we're making in your country, and if they're not the most effective, then complain about it specifically. Write a letter to the president of the World Bank, write to the country director, go see the country director in the country and say, why are you doing this program? It's really expensive and it will only benefit 10,000 people. We've got 10 million people that need benefit from a better program. And I've asked this for 4 years, and I have to say, from the civil society organizations, from this group, and from the governments themselves, there's not enough proactive nature. The World Bank is in the business of doing what's going to help the people of the developing country, and if it's not doing that job, then that should be brought to light and say, why is this program going on? We see programs that have been going on for 30 years, and you say, did it work? Well, no, but we're trying to make it work. Well, that's not really that's wrong and needs to be really corrected. So I'll
okay, brilliant. Right, we're going to try and do one mega round just so we get all the issues on the table, and it's going to be quick fire. So we know what a speech is, and we know what a question is. And what we're looking for here are questions. Let me go to Tanzania first, and then just keep your hands up. That'd be super kind. But just quick fire, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nema Lugangira, Member of Parliament from Tanzania, but also Chair of the Tanzania chapter of the Parliamentary Network on World Bank and IMF. I just want to ask that, given fact that unmitigated global challenges have a huge impact on country development gains, I wanted to ask the President of the World Bank and the MD of the IMF that would the World Bank and IMF consider debt relief to developing countries like Tanzania so that we can have that additional income to invest on all these other demanding areas like human capital, malnutrition, digital connectivity, etc. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let me go to Austria at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. The multiple crises that were mentioned always have a very negative impact on human rights. And I'm especially concerned about sexual and reproductive rights and women's self-determination. And I'm wondering what international financial institutions can do to foster sexual and reproductive rights and women's self-determination.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ecuador.
Good morning. Let's see how I can go about this. This is a tad uncomfortable. Good morning. I represent Ecuador. I'm the president of the National Assembly Health Committee of Ecuador. And I have a series of important questions that I'm sure will benefit my country and the National Assembly. Our National Assembly has considered many dilemmas after COVID-19, and one of them is mental health. Our citizens' mental health when it comes to diseases such as depression, suicide, and health limitations for many of our citizens. In a draft law that we will be submitting to the Assembly, we've analyzed the number of suicides 5,400 suicides that have been registered in our country since 2004. Economic challenges, national challenges, all sorts of challenges that have brought about grave problems to our country. Our National Assembly will seek solution through this law, and we would like to see how can the IMF and the World Bank help us, since our country and our president have settled some of our international accounts, and we have resources or capital in our international accounts.
Thank you. Let me come to Ivory Coast.
Merci. Thank you. And I thank all the members of Parliament, and I greet you on behalf of the President of the National Assembly of Côte d'Ivoire. I had two questions, but given the time, I will only ask one. What can the World Bank and the IMF do for MPs to allow us not only to support our countries in their quest for development, but also to allow us to better assess public policies? Thank you very much.
And then Ukraine.
Great, thank you, Liam. To the panelists, question would be, since you portrayed the future very grim in the developments, in the growth, obviously even developed countries are very much affected with double-digit inflation rises. That means limitation for development assistance and etc. But I have two sets of questions. One set of this is the excess profit tax. How do you look at it? Because it seems right now the world is at war. Even though somebody is refusing that, Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine has actually triggered the turmoil across the world. Energy crisis, different crises, you name it. And you can see that through these 2 years, the excess profiting for energy companies, for banking sector, is crazy. According to Oxfam, 1% of the richest doubled their welfare in the last 2 years compared to the rest of the world. My question to you would be, does IMF and World Bank do engage with 1% of those people? And last but not least, the creditors. We heard the new creditors are arising for developed countries. How do you see new creditors versus predatory loans? Do you consult developing countries on the risks on predatory loans? Thank you.
Great. Ukraine, welcome to one of our newest parliamentary chapters.
Thank you for the invitation. Not question, two remarks. First of all, Ukraine gathered the same amount of taxes which we planned during peaceful time. And it is a real miracle. But paying tax is not very popular still. And the second, I'm representing Ukraine and co-chair of our group cooperation with IMF and World Bank. And I want to say on behalf of people of Ukraine to Mrs. Giorgio and to Mr. Melpas, thank you. Thank you for supporting Ukraine after the full-scale war. Thank you for 5 billion and 1.4 billion support in this time. And I hope that IMF and World Bank will be with Ukraine till our victory. And
Thank you very much.
Victory will be soon. Thank you.
Uganda, please, and then Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. This is Uganda. My question, I have two quick ones. Following the COP 2021 agreement in Paris, where the main objective and aim was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. But since then, we realized that countries, the most industrialized countries, are not cooperative. A number of them are not sharing climate data gathered from satellites. So are there a kind of sanctions that being considered to be slapped on those uncooperative countries.
Interesting.
The second one is about the heavily indebted poor countries. I know there are certain criteria that are used in this HIPIC initiative, like a commitment to policy changes to reduce poverty. But the worst of it all is that a country must face the unsustainable debt burden that cannot be addressed by the traditional debt relief mechanisms. Perfect. But in the advent of COVID-19 and the Ukraine-Russian war, which have actually devastated the economies, don't you think this consideration should change and be more considerate and lenient?
Yeah, great. Okay, Zimbabwe. Then we're going to...
Thank you so much on behalf of Zimbabwe. Both the IMF and the World Bank used to be very active in Zimbabwe about 30, 40 years ago. But today, China is now the most influential country in Zimbabwe in terms of our economic strategy and development plan. Is there a plan by the IMF and World Bank to revisit their role in Zimbabwe, because it could be important to balance the situation back at home? China's influence is now too big.
Right. Thank you. Let me go to Cameroon, and then I'm going to wrap it with Portugal.
Thank you. This is Cameroon. My question is to either the World Bank or the IMF. You talked about scaling local production in Africa. I want to know what is IMF World Bank doing to support the full operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you very much.
Right. And then finally, our Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, Liam. And it's great to be back in person, and thank you for your leadership and the Secretariat for putting all this together after such difficult times. I'm right here in front of you. I saw it. So I come from Portugal, and thank you, Cristalina, for the catchphrase. I'm going to get home and tell my wife that I pay taxes and see if I'm successful. But more important than that, I want to tell you that both of you, that you both mentioned how we are backsliding on poverty and the rise of inequalities. And as David was saying, we should not invest on what hasn't worked for 30 years. Using GDP as our main indicator clearly is not working. And we're seeing countries ineligible for your support because of the rise of GDP, but we see people on the ground not being part of what Liam continues fighting for, the inclusive growth that we're all fighting for. And so a composite indicator that looks at the issues of equity or inequity and well-being, is this something that you believe is part of our upcoming future? We are feeling from the ground that representatives from countries from around the world believe that this change is very much needed. Thank you.
Right. Let me turn back to Cristalina and David. Sorry to inflict one mega round on you, but I wanted to just sort of give you a sense of the range of things that we're debating, and it helps set us up for the rest of the week. We've just got about 5 or 6 minutes to pick up from that what you will. Cristalina, do you want to kick us off? Just pick up what really struck you as
telegraphically, what I take from here is a grave concern about debt, and rightly so. As we sit in this room, the discussions around debt are concentrated on identifying early serious cases and taking action early. We have the common framework. It has been slow to deliver, but it has started delivering some results. And it is our determination, David and mine, to make sure that this accelerates, that we have a resolution for Zambia, that we have a resolution for Ghana, that we have a resolution eventually for Ethiopia. And at the same time, we continue to work on supporting countries' debt management so they don't fall into a situation in which debt service becomes an impossibility. We have done a small debt relief during COVID from the fund by helping 29 countries, the poorest of our members, to not have to pay us, to free them from servicing their debt to the fund during the difficult time they have been going through. Should there be another HIPC? I think it is, at this point, it is a very, very difficult proposition. Why? Because the landscape of creditors has changed dramatically. To have HIPC, you need everybody to agree to write off debt. But now we have traditional, the Paris Club creditors, we have the non-traditional creditors, we have a huge share of private sector creditors, so we have to concentrate on, one, helping countries not to fall into a unsustainable debt situation, two, help them act early if they are at risk, and three, concentrate on the cases where it is absolutely paramount to have debt resolution. I want to secondly talk about progressivity in taxation. At the IMF, we have done quite a lot of work on fiscal matters, and our conclusion is that there has to be more attention to progressivity in taxation at a time when inequalities are growing so much and the distribution of profitability has changed so dramatically. At the same time, I want to be clear that it is important that there is incentive to invest, an incentive to create the jobs that countries need. So these tax policies have to be country-specific, obviously, but should there be more progressivity in taxation? The answer stares us in the face, and it is yes. My third point is to talk a little bit about the engagement with countries where we have had less ability to help countries. Zimbabwe is one case, but it is not the only one. And I can tell you from the IMF, we are always, always, always ready to work with countries. It applies to Zimbabwe. Actually, the bank has done quite a lot to try to move us there. The issue is the following. We have to look at the issues with a common understanding and then be willing to engage and make the changes that are necessary so a country can pull itself out of a difficult situation. And sometimes the conditions are there and sometimes they are not. But I can tell you, I would never give up to any member in need, ever. And I want to finish with the question of GDP. Obviously, this is a completely imperfect measurement. The discussions around going beyond GDP have not yet produced tangible results. But this is not an excuse to stop trying. At the fund, what we work on is to build a core set of indicators that complement GDP. Among them, carbon intensity, vulnerability to climate shocks, and of course, indicator for inequality. And try to get to a point when you look at a country, you do take that more comprehensive approach, even if we have not yet created a compact indicator that replaces GDP.
Perfect. Great. David, bring us to conclusion.
Thanks, Liam. Well, picking up on Kristalina's point there, the World Bank's mission has been thought about a lot over the last 3 months and recognizes the importance of sustainability within the mission and the shortfalls of GDP kinds of metrics or pure monetary metrics simply aren't enough. One thing that I will note is the World Bank has substantial flexibility within the application of the various GDP indicators. For example, just in the last year and 2 years, there have been exceptions or flexibility shown with regard to Sri Lanka, which moved back into IDA, with regard to Barbados, which got 2 large exemptions from the IBRD per the per capita ceiling, with regard to Ukraine and Moldova, which are receiving various latitude within the rules of GDP. So I think the important point, and I think Kristalina made it, is that there is a search for effectiveness, and my sense is there's not a blind set of cutoffs. So then that gets us straight into how can countries really get better access, and that goes to this issue of and this applies to a bunch of countries, whether Zimbabwe or Nigeria or anytime you name countries, Egypt or Pakistan or Ethiopia or on down the line. I could name a lot where there is bigger World Bank Group lending available if there were better prospects from the standpoint of the country's economic programs. So we are looking to have a better outcome for the people of the country, and that gets us straight into, and I want to mention, and I was glad it was raised, the trade issues. The free trade agreement was mentioned. Over history, the world has found it very challenging to create big multi-country groupings of free trade areas. So I really encourage people to look at trade with their neighbor. Cross-border is the biggest benefit, and then second is within your region, and then third within your continent. And it should be done on the full recognition that it benefits the country that's liberalizing in order to allow it. And we see country after country within these current stresses that are closing their markets instead of opening their markets, and that reduces really the effectiveness of their trade. I do want to take a mention on health care, so there was raised self-determination, there was raised human rights. These are fundamental core issues within World Bank governance practice and our encouragement in countries. And I will add tolerance, and there was we're seeing a movement toward intolerance in some countries' policies, and we are speaking out on that. And so I want to underscore the need for more spending in targeted areas within healthcare for the purposes mentioned within the group. I don't want to name countries within the group here today, but there are some that are moving in the wrong direction in terms of tolerance of people within their countries. And I'll stop on debt. Kristalina said several points. So you remember the HIPC initiative that was mentioned took 10 years to negotiate, and it would be even harder in today's context. So I think we need to be thinking in terms of making the case-by-case method better to get to restructurings. We're co-chairing a roundtable this week, and I want to really highlight the importance of transparency. Côte d'Ivoire asked, how can there be better interaction with government policies? And so there are lots of answers to that, and full engagement by the World Bank within administrative practices within countries, spending practices, regulatory practices. But if I put one umbrella over it, it's the transparency of the practices on debt, on regulation, on subsidies and exemptions that occur within countries. That will really move us forward. In the roundtable, we're also trying to have faster sharing of information by World Bank and IMF in terms of the debt sustainability analysis, give it to more creditors, more inclusive process, and to the debtor earlier in the process so that people can interact within their within the debt restructuring process. We're going to start a workshop in June that will look at some of the details of timelines, how to speed them up, of interest or of arrears, how to treat arrears after the cutoff date, and some of the technical details that are worth billions of dollars to people in this room that need to be handled carefully. So all of those are important, and will be I'm pushing those, day by day in the meetings this week. That because, to put it in context, remember, of the IDA countries, so many of whom I named and are here in the room, they're paying $62 billion per year to creditors who are almost always better off than they are, at a time when the entire donations to IDA are $8 billion per year. So from all of the generous donor countries, that's $8 billion in, $62 billion out. So you can see the high urgency of both sides of that, getting more money into the concessional resources that World Bank and IMF can provide, but then very importantly, that we look for faster ways to get the debt restructurings done that actually reduce the payments. And I have to tell you, it's moving very slowly on both those fronts. Thanks.
Great challenge to leave us on. That was a double tour de force. Thank you so much. Please join me in saying a huge thank you to David Kristalina for what was a brilliant hour. Right, we're now going to try and do something very difficult, which is we're now going to try and do a selfie from the stage. David and Kristalina are going to leave us, and then we're going to do a group family photo at the beginning. So would you please join me in standing up so you can be in this magnificent selfie? Which one of us is going to take?
Okay. Who is taking?
It's either me or you.
On the stage? Yeah. Right, if we could, can I encourage you to come to the front? We're going to have one line on the stage and then others in the front. And it's going to look beautiful, and it's going to be something you're going to take home and put on social media, give to children, grandchildren, tweet it. Where's the photographer? Gagana, where's the Gagana? Where's the photographer? Ah, there. Okay, you're there. Right, I know that in our business, photos are the easy bit of the job.
I am right here.
Are all the MPs on the front?
Great. Right, so I'm going to stand here. So you two move to the side a little bit.
All right. Count of three. 1, 2,
One moment. Oh.
All right. 1, 2, ready? One more time. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Good. Perfect.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, they're going to be on the Parliamentary Network Flickr.